Hello, everyone.
Hello.
$290.88 and at least with this, so it's 1, 2.
My tea.
$29,088, 29,088, 3038. Okay, 3038. $3078.
Bless you.
Thank you.
Minus 1898. No, 1898. Oh, good.
It's good. Sorry.
Hi, Kit.
Good morning, everyone. I know there's Carol. Good,
Yes.
Carol's here.
Good morning. Oh, I so remember what happened last year when Marty at the last minute was not able to be the guest speaker because of weather. He had no internet. Something was wrong with the electricity at his home. Well, today I just realized you actually need a password. Thank you, Cindy Madigan. I'm surprised you're all here. I don't know.
Well, yeah, as long as you click the link you get in, it's just
Okay.
if you were going to use the user ID, then you needed a passcode. Yeah, but look
Thank
at it.
So much.
What is the password?
The passcode is
It's
5377.
Hi.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'm sorry, 5377, and then what?
How are you? Good.
48.
right.
You.
Doing
Okay.
good.
Now, I'm going to ask
I'm
everyone
in a meeting
to
until
mute
11.
themselves, especially
So I'll
Ed
be
Chat.
cooking and everything like that.
Okay, good.
I may not
They
have
just
the
said
ability.
my name.
Oh,
Okay, so this is going to be the rough start. So welcome, everybody. I think we're ready to get started here. Cindy, did you just let people in? I'm not really sure how this worked this morning.
No, people did not. There was no waiting room. People could just come in with the link.
Oh, all right, so I'll
Yeah.
really, I didn't want to start too soon because I didn't want to have to edit too much on the beginning of the program.
Yeah.
So here we are. Welcome to the very first ACTviaZoom for 2023. And I'm Carol Sullivan, your kind of flustered host right now. And today our guest speaker is going to be Nancy Sapiro, who is the contract lobbyist for the League of Women Voters of Washington. I'm going to ask everyone, as we begin, please put yourself on mute, and then by hovering your mouse over the three little dots in the upper right-hand corner of your picture, if you're able to do that, please rename yourself to show what part of Washington State you're attending from. So when you click on those little three dots, I think at the bottom, it gives you the option to rename. Leave your name, add your location, please, and put yourself on mute. So if during the discussion you have a question, and you can use the raise your hands button at the bottom of the screen, do that. But Cindy and I are going to be monitoring the chat to see if there are questions posed there as well. And let's go back and see. So our order is a little bit switched around today because we wanted to give some people who are not able to be here next week, Cynthia, and give Alison a chance to talk about Speak Up School before we get to our main speaker this morning, which is Nancy Sapiro. So Alison, if you would like to go ahead and speak up about Speak Up School, please do.
Good
What-
morning, everyone. Thanks for being here, and thanks definitely to Carol for hosting these. I am inviting you, if you haven't already registered for Saturday's event. It is our first Speak Up School of the year. We may have some more, but it's geared towards testifying at the legislature and any other legislative bodies. So we are encouraging people to learn how to testify. We know that sometimes it's a little daunting to figure out what you should say, and we're going to give some tips on how you should say it. Pat Bennett Foreman and Karen Crowley are the main two presenters on Saturday, and they are just wonderful. They spent lots of time creating this curriculum. It's fun. We're going to have time to practice, so you can do a little testimony yourself or testimony as you go, and then practice. Usually there's some echo.
There are a couple of people who are
There
not
we
yet
go.
muted. Madeline Bishop, you need to mute. And Edwina, would you please, if you can, put yourself on mute. Kim Abbey, could you put yourself on mute, please? And then thank you.
Great. So this is Speak Up School, Learn to Testify. And in the note that Carol sent you, it was there. I will also put the link to register in the chat. It's a fun morning with your your fellow friends who want to be active. And it's a great way to just get your chops going and get you motivated to testify both on things that the league needs people to stand up and speak up about, as well as anything else that you're passionate about. The legislature this year is going to have remote testimony. So Karen's definitely going to talk about the best ways to hop on Zoom and give a couple minute testimony. Just a wonderful way to kick off your advocacy for the year. Let me know if anyone has any questions. I'll be around for the next 10 minutes or so.
Okay, that's great. Any questions for Alison? I can speak up about Speak Up School because I learned so much when I took the Speak Up School a year or so ago when, and Karen is just absolutely fantastic. Thank you, Karen, for doing this again. And although you won't be speaking for the league or as a representative of the league, you are able to speak in committee hearings, and sharing personal stories about why things are important to you really is important. Thank you so much, Alison. Appreciate you being here. Hope to see lots of you at Speak Up School next Saturday. So Cynthia, it's now going to be your turn, and Cynthia is unable to be at Meet the Advocates next Monday, but she's here today to let us know what is important in the 3 areas that she covers. So Cynthia, welcome.
Thank you. I'm glad I didn't log on at 10:35 like you suggested. I wouldn't be able to do this. So I want to share my screen, if I may.
Yeah.
I think it's going to be easier to discuss this with a PowerPoint. So let me just.
I can't hear Cynthia. Did she just mute?
Cynthia, you're on mute.
I can't hear her either.
Cynthia, you're accidentally on mute. Would you please just
I
start?
apologize. I did that by accident. I did not do that on purpose. So yeah, thank you for letting me know. So I actually lobby for 4 issues for the league: housing and homelessness, transportation, growth management, and revenue. And I thought perhaps the easiest way to describe what I do and these issues is to talk about why they all work together. It's not like 4 completely different issues that are not connected at all. So first of all, we're working on 2 major crises in the state of Washington. There are other emergencies as well, but these are major crises: the climate change issue and then the lack of affordable housing. And the reason that the 4 issues that I work on come together is that the solutions overlap. So the same kinds of strategies are necessary for environmental and climate change remediation as for addressing homelessness. Now, that's not entirely true, but a large segment of the solutions overlap. So in the case of transportation, we have the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, but we also have the need to organize our housing around transit. So changing the paradigm in our transportation category is really critical. Also, the need to optimize our existing infrastructure works both for transportation and in housing, and the place that that plays out is in growth management in the local comprehensive plans. And then the need to increase density is another solution, both for climate change and for transportation, and also for revenue. And I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So in other words, these are things that need to be worked kind of in synchrony with each other. And most of all, we need to find the money to make this stuff happen. So apropos affordable housing, the state of Washington for the last 5 years has been reporting 250,000 units short on affordable units. What that means is units, in this case, what it means is units that people who are at 60% of median income and below, can't afford. Affordable housing generally means that anybody who can get a house or an apartment at 30% of their income, that's affordable for them. But the social and economic need is for people at the lowest part of the income spectrum. Those are the ones who cannot afford anything in today's market. And that 250,000 units is an estimate, and it hasn't gone down. Now, in the terms of growth management, what we also know is there is going to be population growth. So that number is going to continue to grow, even though we are solving some of it. We also know that for housing, the private sector developers, realtors, and so forth will not accommodate the lowest income people. They just can't afford to do that. And in some cases, they're not willing to do that. The profit margin is something that they strive for. So that means that government has got to support that housing need, and particularly in the case of permanent supportive housing, which is housing for people who absolutely cannot live independently without wraparound support services. The other issue is income inequality and racial inequality, and they go together. Income inequality is part of what's causing this gap in affordability, because there is so much wealth in the hands of some people and so little wealth in the hands of other people. And what we know is that the bottom income spectrum is disproportionately people of color. So there's racial inequity that is historic and longstanding and continues today. So the proposals in the category that are coming up in the legislature of affordable housing are to make a very large appropriation to the Housing Trust Fund. And that's a fund that loans at low interest or grants to nonprofits to provide housing. And they've recently expanded it to remediation of existing housing, so that there's not a lack of maintenance, which causes units to go off of the market. Another proposal is financial support to people in need. So that might be rental assistance. It might be a guaranteed basic income, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. It might be the Housing Essential Needs Program, where people get support for utility bills or other costs that they can't afford, that would, if they got that money, it would keep them in their house. Another category is to use the Growth Management Act to mandate density, which would then increase affordability and increase support for transit service. So those are the things that will be coming up in the legislature this year with regard to affordable housing. In terms of growth management, again, there is overlap. So in both the housing and transportation categories, the legislature will be talking about mandating transit-oriented development. And what that means is, in local comprehensive plans and land use planning in local jurisdictions, the intention would be to put housing as close to transit service as possible. Now, last year, the transit budget was increased significantly. So state support to local transit agencies, and the intention there was for them to increase their services. So the legislature wants local jurisdictions to combine the planning for transit and the planning for housing to make them work together. Another thing that is on the table is requiring local jurisdictions to allow ADUs in single-family neighborhoods. Now, some bills have gone farther than that, but this is the most likely to succeed, I think. And the intention there is there are a lot of people who are living in homes with surrounding property large enough to put a small unit. So the legislature wants local jurisdictions to allow that. And then walkable communities is going to be heavily encouraged, and that has to do with how we organize our transportation as well as our housing. So in climate change, growth management bill, the one that didn't pass last year, that was right down to the wire at the end of session and the legislature had intended to pass it, will come back. House Bill 1099 will require in the comp plans that local jurisdictions have strategies for climate resilience and climate remediation. Some legislators are saying, well, we can't do anything at the local level, but many legislators are saying we have to do everything we can. So in growth management, that will be back on the table this year. Transportation, I put all these pictures here because transportation is a huge sector of our economy. It's the largest generator of greenhouse gases. And we have different ways of planning and regulating these. So everything from aircraft to ferries, from buses to trains, from single-use automobiles and transportation of commercial products, to walking and riding bikes. Those are all forms of transportation. Because there was a large transportation package passed last year, there are likely to be very few changes in the budget this year. And what I understand is the legislature is going to be focusing primarily on safety concerns. The League is joining other people to suggest that rail is something that ought to get more attention. And so we're urging the legislature to approve funding for some studies that will not be nearly the cost of actually the infrastructure, but at least to do some planning and coordination about rail in order to support more people traveling more efficiently across jurisdictional lines. And then there will be continued efforts to increase transit and walkability, and that gets back to the comp plans that I was talking about. So revenue is taxes, and taxes are the way that we get the money to pay for the kinds of things that government should do, or that government encourages others to do through grants and that kind of thing. Right now, this table is a little bit old. It was generated in 2018, but it's still true. The state of Washington has the most regressive tax structure in the entire country. And what this shows is that people on the left-hand side, which is the lowest 20% of income spectrum, pay almost 18% of their income in state and local taxes, while people at the top 1% only pay 3% typically in state and local taxes. So that imbalance is what we call regressive. And it's what that means. The implication of that is that when there's a proposal to raise the taxes, it has an adverse impact and a disproportionate impact on people of color and other low-income people, because this is the way it's structured right now. So the intention is to take a look at that, and I'll talk about some options in a minute. So in addition to all that, the property tax, which is a main source of income for counties, it's a significant source of income for cities, and it's a large source of income as well for the state. The total tax that can be collected is capped at 1% per year. That doesn't mean that your individual tax won't go up, but in aggregate, no jurisdiction is allowed to increase the tax more than 1% during the year unless there's a vote of the people. And what that has done is it has created a real economic barrier for state and local jurisdictions, because the cost of living and the cost of doing business is typically more like 3 to 5%. So as costs go up, the money goes down, and it's had a very detrimental effect on our ability to pay for services at the state and local level. So the goals here would be to increase, address the inequities in the system, and to create, at the same time we're addressing inequities, to create more of a tax base to meet some of the unmet needs. So part of the discussion has been around the concept that we have surplus revenue. Well, that is because the revenue estimates were not as big as the revenue that came in, but that does not mean that we don't have unmet needs that haven't been funded. So diverting attention to the fact that we have a surplus relative to the budget means that people are not really grappling with the lack of solutions. So there's been a tax structure work group in place since about 2019, and it will be coming up with some partial solutions. It is finishing its report right now and did not go as far as some of us were hoping it would in terms of its recommendations based on the last meeting. There's also an emphasis on the Balance Our Tax Code Coalition, to which the League belongs, asking that the legislature focus on the wealth tax, the estate tax, which would put more of the tax burden on the more wealthy people, and also consider the guaranteed basic income. So last year or 2 years ago, the capital gains tax was approved by the legislature, but the implementation was slowed by court action. It's still in the court system, but the lower court authorized the state to start collecting it. That would have had a slight impact on the people on that right-hand side of the table, the more wealthy people. And in combination with that, the working families tax credit does actually generate about $500 a year on average for people at the lower income level who are paying that disproportionate amount. But neither of those things, even in combination, really levelizes or creates a progressive tax structure. So the wealth and estate tax that are being promulgated by the Balance Our Tax Code Coalition, and the Guaranteed Basic Income Pilot Project, which could lead to an actual statewide program, are intended to do similar things. So the wealth and estate taxes would get the higher income people. The Guaranteed Basic Income would make payments to very low income people to give them the resources to get their needs met. That still, even in combination, would not equalize or levelize our tax structure. So more needs to be done. In addition to all those things, the gas tax is going down, the revenue from it. And in addition to that, it's limited to highways, which includes ferries in the Constitution. So the intention is to adopt a road use tax, which would actually charge on a per mile used basis and kind of levelize the cost of providing our infrastructure across all types of vehicles, including electric ones, which currently only pay an annual fee. So that I hope in a nutshell gives you a sense of what those 4 issues are and how they might work together. That wasn't much detail, but I hope it provides at least a basic understanding of what to expect.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. I'm so glad you were able to be here today and not next week.
Me
But-
too. Thank you.
And I'm also glad that you're going to come back and give us more detail and more updates as the session progresses. And she's not coming back till probably in March, so she'll have a lot to update us on, and we'll give her the whole session. Thank you, Cynthia. And now it is time for us to welcome Nancy Sapiro. And here's what I know about Nancy. She comes to the lobby team meetings just about every week, and she gives us information about what's happening. But I've also learned she's an attorney, as well as being a contract lobbyist. She's been working in Olympia since 2012, and her areas of interest are healthcare, reproductive health, civil rights, economic and social justice policy, and supporting working families. She's kind of like the Cynthia, who has lots of topics that she's interested in. She's also a UW graduate, but that's the University of Wisconsin in Madison, not our own UW here in Seattle. So Nancy, perhaps you can tell us first how you came here from the other UW to be in Washington, and then you can let us know how you became a contract lobbyist and what other kind of lobbyists are there, and what you'd like to tell us about your vision of what the legislation is, or the session is going to be like in this first half of the biennium. So thank you, Nancy, for being here, and please go ahead.
Thank you so much, Carol. Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. Happy 2023. Hope everyone's excited about the year ahead and all the things that are possible in the world of advocacy. Yeah, I can do that. I'm not a huge fan of talking about myself, but I will do my best to give a little bit of background about sort of how I came to the world of advocacy and why I find it exciting. And then we can probably, more importantly to me, talk about some things that are going to be happening in the 2023 session, just to expand upon a number of the things that Cynthia mentioned. I have always been fascinated in the legislative process and majored in political science in college, and actually got a job as a legislative aide in the Wisconsin State Capitol, and did that for a couple of years after college and found that to be just really, really fascinating. It prompted my interest in wanting to go to law school. And so I went to law school at the University of Wisconsin. You know, on myself and my family, we say we are the true UW. I know that's not a safe thing to say in the state of Washington, but Wisconsin, I still do, you know, hold true to my home state. Anyway, so went to law school, the University of Wisconsin, and then really just had a desire to move out west, to be near mountains. I had some family in Oregon, actually had a brother who lived in Oregon. And so just sort of somehow landed out here. Originally moved to Spokane, but I was unable to find work as an attorney there. And I was working at a bakery making bread for minimum wage, and realized that that was, I wasn't gonna be able to pay off my law school loans doing that. So I applied for jobs in Seattle and was able to land a job as a public defender in Seattle. I did that for a number of years. I worked in misdemeanors, I worked in juvenile offenders, and I also worked on dependency and child welfare cases. And I found that work really, really meaningful. But what I kept, I kept seeing is that I felt like I was recreating the wheel with each client that I represented, that the same issues kept coming up again and again and again. And primarily they were poverty, and they were also substance abuse and behavioral health issues. And each time it was like trying to help an individual client find a solution, help them out of their circumstances. And I just came to feel that there needed to be a more systemic way to look at sort of the societal issues that we were facing. And so because of that, I really wanted to start focusing on policy and making policy change. And so I went to work for a nonprofit that really worked, that focused primarily on women's rights, but we were looking at trying to make systemic changes. And so in that role, I was able to work on impact litigation, trying to make changes to the laws. And we also had a legislative program. And so I was able to help work with our lobbyist at the time and try to come up with policies to address some of the systemic problems that we saw facing women and their families. And I did that for a number of years. I found that really rewarding, but I kept every time that as I was working with the lobbyist at the time, I'd say to her, like, here's this really well-crafted policy that, I've drafted, now take it and, run with it and get it passed. And there would be all these challenges. And she'd say, like, well, it didn't make it through committee. It didn't make it through this, or this legislator didn't like it. And my rational brain was like, I don't understand. This is a really great policy. Why isn't it moving? And I came to understand from her that there was a whole other dimension, sort of aside from what is a sound, rational policy. And those are the people and the politics that go on among the people who are making decisions about what laws will and will not pass. And I recognized that I really wanted to know more about that dimension. I wanted to know more about that world, and what were the factors beyond, like, here's a great policy. what are the other things I need to know, and what are the other steps that one needs to take to actually have that really great policy become law. And so I decided, I really wanted to try my hand at lobbying. And so went down there really not knowing a whole lot. And I had some great mentors who let me tag along with them and, learn about the process and learn about the importance of building relationships among people, the importance of really studying the relationships among other people and how they get along, and really coming to see that there is this whole other level of work that happens to actually take your policy and make it become law. And so I've been doing that. Yeah, 2011, 2012, sometime around there. And I absolutely love it. It is a combination of my interest in actual policy. But it also combines my interest in people and communication, in advocacy, in relationship building. And it's a little bit like playing chess. Like there's multiple pieces on the board and you're constantly trying to think about which piece to move and when to move it. So there is a lot of strategic thinking that goes into it, and I love that. I think the other thing that I find really compelling is that I'm constantly learning. I mean, every year there are new policies that my clients want to work on, and so I have to learn new issues. And so I'm constantly learning things, and I think that's just a really a wonderful thing to be able to say that I feel like every day I'm learning something new. And the work is forever humbling, because as much as you think you're also constantly falling flat on your face, because there's always something new to learn in this environment. So that's a little bit about how I got here. As far as other lobbyists, I mean, I consider myself I wouldn't say a public interest lobbyist, but the clients that I work with typically are all nonprofits, and so are mission-driven, mission-based. I, work for myself, and as Carol said, I'm a contract lobbyist. So I have various clients that I work with, which cover a range of issues, as Carol articulated. There are lots of other kinds of lobbyists, and there are lobbyists who work in-house. In other words, they are connected with an organization or with a business, and so their specific goal or focus is driven by the mission of the organization or the interests and priorities of a business. And so we refer to them as sort of in-house lobbyists. And then there are lobbyists that specialize in particular areas. They might be healthcare lobbyists, they might be business lobbyists. Excuse me, so lobbyists that work in various sectors, that could be in real estate, in medical issues, or pharmacy, pharmacology. So there's a whole range. Pretty much any business interest that you can think of likely has one, if not many, lobbyists. Those of us that work for nonprofits, I think, are definitely in the minority. And there certainly is, we don't have the expense accounts that business lobbyists do, and we really do not are not able to want, the typical image you might have of a lobbyist is sort of whining and dining. I mean, that is not something that folks that work sort of within the nonprofit or public sector do. But we all work really, really hard and think that we are really just as effective in what we do. So that's a little bit about lobbying, about the different types of lobbyists. I think, I can talk a little bit about some of the things that lobbyists do, and then perhaps jump into what we see for 2023. what a lobbyist does really depends upon the needs of their client or the entity that they work for. Ultimately, the job is to work to influence the legislative process, whether that is for laws to pass or to try to stop something from moving. As I mentioned, really key to that is building relationships, and that is with not only with legislative members, but also with their staff. Also with, people that work with other organizations, other fellow lobbyists where there's common cause amongst us. So it's a lot of relationship building, and which is imperative to the work that we do. We tend to offer legislative support to lawmakers and staff, and that comes in various forms. I think when you think of the typical image of a lobbyist, or if you think of lobbyists in Congress and you hear that lobbyists are writing legislation, that's seen in a very negative context, and that really has a corrosive influence. And I think that certainly can be the case, but I also would like to paint the picture that I view what I do as incredibly helpful to legislators and staff. Legislators have a myriad of issues that they need to know about, and they simply cannot be an expert on every possible topical area. And so, for example, in the reproductive health context, with the fall of Roe this year, a number of legislators came to those of us that work in the reproductive health and justice space and said, we want to be helpful. What do we need to do in the state of Washington to ensure that there is ongoing access to reproductive health care? You all are the ones who provide these services, who advocate on behalf of the entities that provide the services. What do we need? And so we were able to provide them and say, look, we've talked to providers, we've talked to healthcare entities that provide these services. Here are the kinds of things that we think we need. And so we worked with them and worked with staff to draft policy proposals that were then vetted through various channels. And one could look at that and say, oh my gosh, they're writing legislation. From my perspective, the legislature is very short staffed. There's not sufficient staff for individual members or just sort of on the larger context. And so we were able to provide them resources, information that help them figure out what they wanted to do in 2023. So again, from my perspective, that is very helpful. And I don't think legislators would have been able to sort of do the work that they've done to date without that sort of input from folks like myself. So other types of things that we do, we can draft legislation. I've done that at times. Once we come up with policy proposals, we need to find, sometimes we have an idea, but we don't have a sponsor in mind. So we may be reaching out to legislators to find out if they want to take the lead and sponsor the legislation. When it comes time for public hearings, I often think of myself as a bit of a choreographer, because I will help the legislator figure out who are the right people to testify, what do we want them to cover, what order and sequencing should we have people testify in, who's going to provide rebuttal testimony. So who are the right voices to be heard from? So all that work goes into. Often in that context, I also will help people write their testimony or review their testimony, so they, to ensure that they're hitting the points that we think need to be heard. I also spend a ton of time just meeting with legislators to educate them on the issues that I care about. So I'd say, a huge chunk of my time, both during session and during the interim, is meeting with legislators, talking to them about priorities, finding out what's important to them, how I can be helpful to them on issues that they care about. And then in addition to that, a lot of it is just shepherding things through the process. Once a bill has a committee hearing, as you all know, not everything makes its way out of committee. So you need to meet with committee members, ensure that their concerns have been addressed, what amendments or changes need to happen to a policy proposal to have it move on through the process. You need to keep, keep attention on the policy elevated, because there's so many competing bills that bills can very easily be lost in the process. So part of my job is to make sure that those bills stay at the forefront of people's attention, and that they are prioritized by leadership, and so that they are voted on and make their way through the process. So throughout that process, I really am, doing hand holding, serving as a conduit for information sharing among legislators, or between the House and the Senate, and just, sharing information. This is of concern to him. How do we address that? I'll let them know about this. So all that work, I will say, was so much more challenging when we were operating remotely, because the only way you could connect with people is if you could reach them by telephone or send them an email. And when we're down in Olympia, we really are able to sort of talk with people very, while you're passing them in the hall, and quickly share information. And so I'm really looking forward to being down there again, because I think all of us will be much more effective when we are face to face and in person. So that was a whole long mouthful. If folks have questions, I'm happy to take them. Or I can jump into what we think 2023 is going to look like.
I see we have a question. We had a question from Lenny first, and I don't see her on the screen to know where she is, because I can't see her. But her question was, when will committee assignments being posted? I know some of them have been made already, and Cynthia did answer it, but let's ask and answer that question for everyone, please. When will committee assignments be made public, I guess?
Most of them are. I just checked this morning. They are not up on the legislative website, but the House and Senate, the respective caucuses, have announced who is going to be on which committee. It just hasn't been combined into, like, here are the committee members. So but the House, like D is released, here are the people that we're going to put on each committee. The House R's have done the same. So that information is available piecemeal right now, but you will see it up on the legislative website come Monday, January 9th, because that's when people are officially inducted into office and the official committee assignments sort of happen. And so that's when it'll be posted, when the new legislative session begins next Monday.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a question from you, Deborah, from Jefferson.
Hi. Are you open to the occasional question directly to you about something that's in your wheelhouse?
I am, yes.
Okay, how do we do that?
I can put my email address in the chat.
Thank you. Oh, sorry. What? Hang on just a sec.
Thank you. Obviously, we don't want to overburden you. You've got a lot to do.
Okay, I think that answers that then. And Nancy, then do you want to go ahead and I don't see any other questions yet, unless there's something in the chat that I haven't seen. Oh, Andrea said, I'm just going to read Andrea's. I happen to know Andrea personally, and at this time 3 years ago, we were together or on our way to Guatemala for a little trip. So good morning, Andrea. And your comment is, I agree with your opinion that you help legislators. When I was one, I had a particular lobbyist that was extremely helpful and guided me through the House process. So there's something that, very specific. Thank you for what your colleagues do. And okay, I think that's it. So, no,
See
Laura.
a question, from Laura. Laura has her hand up.
I'm just wondering what the best way for us to attempt to educate our lawmakers. Would they respond to, I'm guessing that it needs to be brief, but would they respond to just like a simple email with like an attachment of a resource, or what would you suggest, as opposed to like a big paper?
It really, I think it depends on what the issue is and what time of year you're talking about. I mean, once session begins next Monday, they will be going 1,000,000 miles an hour, and they will until the end of April. They are inundated with information. So brevity is always good. So, if you have only a few moments, you can, call the legislative hotline, and they will, you tell them your address, they'll tell you who your legislators are, and you can convey a message, in 10 seconds if you wish. If you are comfortable reaching out directly to your legislator, you can call or email. If you are comfortable and it is close and convenient for you, you can call your legislator's, office and tell them you're a constituent and ask for a meeting. You may get 5 or 10 minutes, but it's still 5 or 10 minutes. I have always said that I think the best way to communicate with your legislator is to build a relationship with them and to reach out to them when they are not in session. Over the interim, they are much more willing to meet with constituents. I shouldn't say more willing, they have the capacity to meet with their constituents, and you may get, 30 minutes to have a conversation with them. Let them know about issues that you care about that are important to you. And if I encourage you to do that every year. So you're starting to build that relationship so that when you send your email in February saying, I really care about this passage of the Growth Management Act, they're going to remember you. And they'll think back to the conversations, and I just think it may have more impact. So really think of advocacy as something you can do 365 days a year, not just in February. I mean, the action alerts that the league sends out that say, please send, email to your legislator today to pass 1099. I mean, that's really important work to do, but those aren't your only opportunities. And I encourage you to think about doing it year round.
I also have a question. We, as the lobby team, we ask people to sign in usually pro, for some committee hearing. Do they pay attention to that?
They do. And that's a good reminder, Carol. Now that, excuse me, I apologize. It is our understanding that you'll be able to, again this year, sign in remotely as supportive or in opposition of a piece of legislation. And that certainly is an important way to let legislators in general know that what public opinion is on a particular policy. Your particular legislator, even if they sit on that committee, may not know that. I mean, likely will not, but what they're looking at is like, oh my gosh, like 200 people signed in and they're all supportive of this policy. And so the committee members will, may take that as a sign of public interest and whether or not they should be continuing on with the policy. But if you want your particular legislator to know that you care about a particular issue, signing in support or opposition to a bill isn't going to be helpful. You should reach out to them either through email or a phone call and to let them know that you care about a particular topic.
There's a question from Sherry.
Hi, Nancy. This is Sherry Dysart.
Hi, Sherry.
Hi. Thank you for being good to be here with you. Thank you. And I have some legislation I'm already tracking, and I wonder about, is there a formula to know which committees will hear these bills ahead of time? Is there some kind of magic formula that I should know about? And does it have anything to do with, like, let's say that a chair of a particular committee is the main sponsor of this legislation? Is that kind of an indication of where it's going to go for the first section? So I'm kind of trying to figure out the pathway and what do I pay attention to here?
It's a great question, and it's all fairly subjective. I wish there was a formula I could tell you, but there really isn't. When a policy bill is introduced, there are a very small group of legislators within the House and within the Senate that review every bill and decide what committee it should be sent to. They'll look at what the subject matter is. Oftentimes it can be very obvious, like, well, this is a transportation issue, so it needs to go to transportation. But as Cynthia pointed out, there are many issues that they're sort of overlapping issues. And so it really could go, this could go to healthcare, this could go to law and justice, this could, and so that is a rather subjective decision that leadership make about where a bill should go. It can be influenced by who the chair of the committee is. So that's certainly, if there are a couple of competing committees where a bill could land and the sponsor is in one committee, yeah, probably more likely that that's where the bill is going to go. But it really is, it is a subjective process. There have been occasions, rarely, but it does happen where a bill is referred to a committee, and for various reasons, whether that's legislators decide they really didn't want it there, or advocacy organizations make a big fuss, that bills can be taken back from a committee and re-referred to another committee. That rarely happens, but I have seen it happen on occasion. And then to complicate it even further, every 2 years, the legislature, they look at the committees and the jurisdiction of the committees, and they sometimes change them. So you'll see issues around cannabis that might have been in one committee now are going to another. And so the committee structure that you see in 2023 is going to look a little different than it looked in 2022. And I can't off the top of my head tell you, but there are a number of issues that fell into one committee's purview last year that now will be in another committee's purview. So not a very black and white, here's the pathway, here's the answer, Sherry, but that's the way many things are down there.
And
you,
Karen
Nancy.
has a question. Thanks, Nancy.
Good
Karen?
morning. Good morning. This session is now going to be hybrid. Folks are back down in Olympia. And so would you comment just a little bit on, folks will have the opportunity to testify remotely as well. Would you just talk a little bit about maybe about that and the energy of being online and testifying remotely versus being there in person, and just your thoughts about that?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. I mean, it was shocking and such a huge adjustment to move to a remote environment. And then we finally sort of got that down last year. And now it really is a new challenge to figure out how to do this hybrid format. All legislators, I shouldn't say, I mean, there might be some exceptions, but by and large, most legislators will be down in Olympia. Committee hearings will be people will be in person, the legislators will be there, staff will be there, all of the floor debate, all those things will be in person. Where we see opportunities for remote participation are twofold, I think. One is as far as meeting with your legislator. I mean, that used to always be in person. And every office is going to have their own policy. So there is no universal policy, but if I think you need to reach out to your legislator and find out if they are open to remote meetings as opposed to in-person meetings. I'm assuming that the answer to that will be yes, but there is technological things that need to be considered, and LA's may well, I know, sort of how you balance the in-person meeting with the remote. It's going to be up to each office to figure out. And then the other piece where there is the opportunity for remote participation is through committee hearings, as you noted. What I have not heard details on is sort of how committee chairs are going to balance. Okay, you have 50 people who are in the room who want to testify, and you have 50 people who have indicated they want to testify remotely. How does that committee chair figure out, is it fit, 25 of each? Do people in the room get priority? Do people remotely get priority? The last I heard, which was several weeks ago, is that there is no uniform policy, that each committee chair will get to decide that themselves, how they want to handle that. So, which is problematic, but that as of, mid-December, that is what I had heard, that there was no uniform policy. I think the ability to participate remotely is incredibly important. It is a pain in the patootie to have to travel to Olympia, whether you live in Seattle or, even more so if you live in Spokane, right? It is an adventure to travel there, to try to find parking. It is an all day encompassing affair. And so I think it is so great that they now have remote testimony. And I think they are hearing from people that they never heard from before. And that is incredibly important. But I will say, having said that, I think we all will agree that, Zoom meetings are not the same as being face-to-face with people. And, it's not the same as sort of that human interaction. And I do think, in all candor, that something is lost, when we're in meetings remotely, as well as when you're offering testimony remotely. I mean, you don't get to see the facial expressions of everyone on the committee. You don't have that sort of just give and take that we all have when we're, meeting face to face. So I do think, as far as energy or impact, there's definitely something to be said for being in person. But having said that, I think the opportunity for new people, new voices, new faces is just really, really important. So I'm hoping that all committee chairs will continue to, give a lot of attention to people who want to participate remotely. I don't know if that's helpful, Karen, but
no, thank you. It's helpful. It's really interesting to hear that there is not a uniform agreement in this area, because that obviously you can have some imbalance if one committee chair says, I'm going to give preference to your being here in person. And so I would hope that leadership is looking at that and trying to set some universal standards and rules. It sounds like that might not happen this year, but maybe we'll be looking at that for the future, because the league is certainly doing our lobby week remotely. And much of our testimony, I'm sure, will be remote. Yeah. Thanks.
Sure.
Lenny, let's get to your question.
Yeah, I was hoping we could hear what Nancy had to say about what's coming up for the 2023 session that she thinks we should really look, is really going to be pointed this year.
Happy to do that in the couple of minutes that we have left. Well, Cynthia touched on one of them, housing and homelessness, a huge issue, has been for a number of years, will continue to remain a priority, even more so after the pandemic. Increased housing insecurity, economic disruption have led to just increasing problems as far as housing security for people, housing insecurity for people, and homelessness. So that will continue to be a major focus for the legislature. The one thing that this is a long session, will run for 105 days, and it's an odd year session, and in odd years, long sessions, they have to pass a biennial operating and capital budget and transportation budget. That is the focus of much time and energy. A lot of that you won't really see publicly until later on in the session, once we have a revenue forecast that comes out in March, and there will be House and Senate budgets. And so that work is going on behind the scenes now, and it's taking up a lot of energy of staff and legislators, but publicly that becomes part of the conversation, and very much so a huge focus, because it is the one thing that they have to do this year. And so that is a huge piece of the work that they will do. I think Cynthia touched on this a little as well, as far as climate. I mean, there were significant in climate commitment and focusing on climate issues, significant investments made in that in the past couple of sessions. And I think there was an article in the Seattle Times today about this actually. And so they have passed very ambitious bills in the past few years and sort of put the framework in place. And now they need to make the decisions about how they are going to spend the money that's coming in and what sort of investments they want to make. Public safety, it will be a very, very big issue again in 2023. You may have seen in the paper, there also is legislation this year working for a ban on assault weapons. And there seems to be a feeling that this is the year to do that. I mean, you may be aware that similar legislation has been introduced for many years in the past unsuccessfully, but folks who work in that space really think that this is the year that a ban could happen. Behavioral health will also continue to be a huge issue. The governor has highlighted that as one of his priority issues. Again, their last couple of years, there have been very significant investments that were made in behavioral health. And now really the focus is on building more community-based systems, preventative care, increasing the pipeline of providers to provide those services to folks. So that is going to be a major focus. And reproductive rights and health, as I mentioned earlier, given the fall of Roe, and given that we have substantial Democratic majorities in both House and the Senate and in the governorship, there definitely will be a package of bills to ensure and protect access in the state of Washington.
That's it in a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
So that kind of brings us, we're really close to the end yet, 11 o'clock. And I just put into the chat the meeting ID and the passcode that I was not aware we had until about 13 minutes before the session started. Next week, we're going to hear from more members of the advocacy team with their updated legislative priorities. And Linda, your question was, oh, did you get your questions answered about the critical areas?
No.
Okay,
No, the question I asked,
this last question.
My question was, can you identify some bills that you believe are critical to be passed early in the session rather than later?
My quick answer to that is anything that you care about should pass. You want to strive to have it move quickly and move earlier on in the session. As we move through the session, focus starts to turn to budgetary issues, things get tied to other things, and it just gets more and more complicated to work a bill through the process. So if, the best chance for success in anything is have it heard quickly, have it move quickly, have it move out of committee quickly. Things that don't happen till later on in the session are much more challenging to ultimately make their way through the process.
Edwina, thank you. Do you have a quick question, Edwina? When you're on mute.
How the University of Washington is involved this year for the first time on a program where anyone in services or the police can call the psychiatric department and talk to a professional so that we hopefully never have mentally ill people who are shot for their craziness when it's their illness. And they're on board 24 hours a day. And that's one step. The other one is being able to testify via Zoom. I have a mobility handicap. And for me, this is going to be wonderful because it's too long of a slog for me to be there in person, unless Carol is taking me somewhere. But seriously, so that we're bringing more voices into the discussion, to me, is a wonderful asset. But when we talk about, we want everyone to be included, then we're going to have to include these type of conversations where we're on Zoom, or our voices, except for signing a petition online, will never be heard. But I do know it's a wonderful step in psychiatry to have these professionals be able to respond to issues on the spot. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you so much. Call sister thy knowledge, or knowledge is my sister, from the Torah.
Kim, I can't end the session without hearing what you have to say. Go ahead, ask your question.
Nancy, I have a question. I think it was actually the session before last that there was a bill passed for a work group at the UW to study the access to end-of-life assistance. And I just wonder, could you lead me back to how to find that study? Or what, is it resolved? Is the committee dissolved, or are they still on it?
Kim, I can send you, yes. So this past legislative session, there was a study that was funded to look at some of the barriers folks face in trying to access medical aid in dying. That preliminary report was completed in early December, and I'll send you a copy of it. And there will be legislation in 2023, again, that will attempt to address reducing some of the barriers as far as to end-of-life care and medical aid in dying. And so I can send you information on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Of course.
And there is one question. Lenny was patient, had her hand up in the corner there, and her question did not get asked. I'm not sure. I apologize. So Lenny's question was, she wanted to ask about the best strategies for building relationships with the staff, not just legislators. And then I think we'll close on the answer to that.
So as far as building relationship with your legislators, I think doing that over the interim is your best strategy. The thing that I always, people who've heard me talk before have heard me say this before, but don't undervalue building a relationship with staff. They are the eyes and ears to their legislator. They convey everything that's important to them, including if someone was rude or dismissive of them, and that is not taken well by legislators. So they really play a really, really important role. Many of them have really in-depth understanding of lots of different policies. So if someone says, I can't offer you a meeting with a legislator, but you can meet with staff, don't blow that off. It really does matter, and it's important. And you may find legislators saying that to you, particularly during session, but if you want to focus on, a relationship with your actual legislator, I would say, call them, email them, take them out, go for coffee in June, go for coffee in September. That's the way to sort of build a long-term relationship with them.
Thank you. That's really a good note to leave this on, kind of like, don't piss off the staff people. Yeah. We'll stop there. Sorry to be so colloquial. Cynthia put a note in that she had to leave, but if you have additional questions, email her. And she has her email right there in the chat. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. I hope you'll be here next week when we actually get to meet some more of the issue chairs, and we'll meet the advocacy team and hear priorities in so many different areas. Thank you for being here. And again, thanks to Kim Abbey for last year on this very first ACTviaZoom for really saving the day by just totally stepping up when all of a sudden I had no speaker. And there she was. Okay. So thank you so much. I hope to see you all next week. However you manage to enter, do it again. Thank you. And they'll close now, Cindy. Bye.